In this video, we're going to look at the behavior properties that are common to most of the ASP.NET web form controls. The behavior properties are found as the second grouping of properties in the property box, and they include things like access key, auto postback, whether it's enabled or enable view state. And we're going to take some time to look at some of the most common of these properties. We're going to start off by taking a look at the access key property. And what this allows you to do is set a character that, when combined with the Alt key, will allow you to go directly to that control. So you might be replacing a system that the users have used a mainframe application for years, and they're used to a series of keyboard strokes, and you're replacing it with a web forms application. And these users want the same type of ability to access certain fields of information using access keys, the Alt and some letter combination. So you simply have to type in the letter. Like, for example, in this text box, I typed in the letter Q, and in this text box, I typed in the letter W. Now let's take a look at a couple more properties before we actually test this. We'll take a look also at a common property known as the tooltip. And in this property, all we'll do is we'll set it to a little message which says press Alt plus W. That's a little reminder for us. And here I put press Alt plus Q. So when we hover our mouse cursor over that text box, it's a reminder to the users that they can use a keyboard combination to access that particular field on the web form as well. The next property is the tab index. You can set the order in which the tabs will be the fields will be tabbed through as the user selects the tab key on the keyboard. So typically you would set from the upper left-hand corner to the lower right-hand corner in ascending order. However, if you were so inclined, you could set, for example, the button to tab index 0, this text box to tab index 1, and this to tab index 2, so that when the user presses the tab key, he's actually going in reverse order than what you might expect, just so that we can exercise this particular property. So what we'll do is we'll test the three properties that we've set so far by selecting View in Browser. The first thing that we'll do is hover our mouse cursor over each of the text boxes and notice that a tooltip appears. Press Alt plus W and press Alt plus Q. So let's go ahead and illustrate then the access key property by selecting Alt and Q on the keyboard. You'll just have to trust that I'm doing this. Now I'm going to select Alt and W, and notice that I can switch back and forth just from the keyboard without using the mouse at all. Now the next thing that we said is that we would set the tab index, and if you recall, we set the button's tab index to 0, this text box's tab index to 1, and this text box tab index to 2. So we should go in reverse order. So I'm going to select the tab key, and notice that that's exactly what happens, that we went in reverse order. So now that we've tested these three properties, let's continue on and take a look at some of the other properties in the behavior section. What we'll do now is select the visible property for this label control. What we can do is set the visible to false, and though you see it in design time, whenever we run this application and take a look at it when it's on the web, we will not see this control, so it becomes a hidden control. The next thing that we'll do is set the enable property for the button. Whenever you click the enable property, we'll set whenever you click the button, we'll set the enable property to false. And that basically says display the button or display the text box or whatever this applies to, but the user cannot interact with that property. So we'll go ahead and set it back to true for design time, but when somebody clicks on that button, notice that we've set some code, button 1 enabled equals false. So we can set it, any of these properties within our code. And then one final property that we'll look at is the auto postback property. For this text box, I set it to true. And what that means is whenever we finish typing in text in that text box, this form will repost to itself. It'll perform a post back. And so we'll capture that event within our page load handler, and we'll check if the post back is true, then put in the label whatever was typed in the text box, just to illustrate this point. So we're going to save all of our changes that we made, select rebuild the solution, and it seemed to succeed. So we're going to view in the browser again, and now it's loaded. Notice the very first thing is that the label that we said, now you see it, well, now you don't see it. It's gone because we set the visible property equal to false. The next thing that we're going to do is click on the button, and notice when we do that, that it becomes disabled. Now this is kind of not very useful because we didn't give ourselves a facility to actually turn it back to enabled, but that's okay for right now, just for illustration purposes. And then the final thing that we did was auto post back in this text box. So I'm going to type some text, and I'm going to hit the tab key on the keyboard, and when I do, an auto post back is performed because we set the auto post back property for the text box equal to true. And in closing, I'd like to show you one more thing. I'm going to actually view the source of this page that we created, and notice that, again, a property of the ASP.NET web form controls was that they would generate the appropriate HTML for the type of browser that your user is using, or it's going to try as hard as it can. So in this case, it's going to do a lot of things on the client with DHTML. For example, notice that, let's take a look at this text box 1, the very first input control, name equals text box 1, type equals text. Notice that it actually has an access key property, and this is not common to HTML, so this is not going to work in a previous version of Netscape, for example. There's going to have to be an actual post back to the server in order to do this. And it sets the tab index. Again, this is not a standard HTML element. These are DHTML elements that are supported in the most recent version of the DOM within Internet Explorer. And so a lot of these things are controlled from DHTML since we're using IE6 within Visual Studio.NET. Also, notice that it does generate some JavaScript for us, in this case, to do a post back whenever the text box is tabbed out of. And this little JavaScript function gets called by text box 1. We're going to scroll over to the right. When does it get called? Whenever there's an onChange event that occurs within that text box, it's going to call the doPostBack JavaScript, passing in a reference to text box 1, which is the name of the text box. And then it'll perform this little doPostBack. So again, the controls are going to do whatever it takes in order to render as much as possible on the client. If it's not possible, then it will try to do a little more and a little more and a little more on the server. But at any rate, this is a good place to stop for our discussion right now. What we intended to do when we set out was talk about the common behavior properties, common web form controls, and we took a look at a few, and there's probably several more that we can look at. However, this covers the basis for the text box and for the button and for most of the controls that you'll experience.